working with John through much of the 80s, and this was his street. North Beach, Broadway, Columbus, up and down the Strip. He worked just about every place on this strip, certainly here at the Stone with bands like Terry and the Pirates, Zero, Thunder and Lightning. John worked over here across the street at what was the Mabui Gardens, played there with Fish and Chip and the Dinosaurs and a number of other bands.
Great. Let's walk a little bit and let's just have to talk about John and managing him.
Working with John was an interesting experience. The bands that I worked with that John was in, which there were probably 6 or 7, all seemed to be fairly chaotic, undisciplined bands who didn't follow the traditional mold of rehearsing and having band meetings and using set lists and things like that. And it was always a struggle for John because John was a real professional. He was there for the audience. And it always seemed to be a bit of a conflict working with these somewhat unprofessional, although outstanding musicians. John always managed to keep it together, and regardless of who he was playing with, always put on a real professional performance. Here's another club that John spent a lot of time at with Terry and the Pirates, Thunder and Lightning, Zero, Fish and Chip, the famous Chi-Chi Club. Miss Keiko was one of John's biggest fans, and John had many eventful evenings at this club, which is now closed like so many of the venues that John had played at, particularly in the 80s.
What was it like playing here at Chi-Chi?
It was always a lot of fun. Always big crowds. The sound sucked. The dressing room sucked. People always had a good time here, and somehow or another they always pulled it off. But regardless of the situation, John always put on a great show. He was the consummate showman, and truly a professional. And always a big thrill to work with him. Great sense of humor. And even in his final days when he was pretty much stuck in a wheelchair or walking on crutches, John would get out there without any assistance. He didn't want his audience to know that he was having any problems. He was one of those few musicians that was aware that people put down their money, they came to see a show, to be entertained, to boogie and party, and he gave them that. And tried to leave his personal problems outside of the club.
Well, what are some of the funniest stories that you can recount about being on tour with John?
The funniest thing I remember about being on tour with John was his final tour, which happened about 6 weeks before he passed away. We went to Greece with Nick Ramonitis, and John was pretty much confined to a wheelchair at that point. And I remember one day we were in Athens, and this gorgeous raven-haired Athenian woman was escorting us around the town. She was pushing John in the wheelchair, and I was carrying his crutches, just so if he wanted to get up and walk some, he could have the crutches. And I remember I was walking with the crutches under my arm, and he was in the wheelchair, and we looked like this terrible scene. And all of a sudden, this beautiful woman put her hands on John's head and on my head, and John leapt up from the wheelchair. I threw my crutches away and started dancing. John started spinning in circles, and the crowd around was just standing there in amazement. It was a classic scene. I wish I had the camera on that one.
And what was it like making sure that John got out for the set? Was it ever a problem?
It was never a problem. John was always surrounded by fans wherever he went. He was the only musician that I've ever worked with who took the time to not only say hello to every fan, not only sign an autograph for every fan, but take the time to look them in the eye, to find out their name, and to sign the autograph to that person. He really cared about his audience, and yet he knew that his main job in this life was to perform, to play great music, and when it was time to start the show, John was always there.
And when did you first meet John? How did you get into managing John?
I first started working with John when Barry Melton put together the Dinosaurs back in 1982. And quite frankly, I was a little intimidated. Barry said, well, tonight you're going to meet John Cipollina. And I had always had the image of John that probably a lot of people did, that he was a druggie. He looked like he was way strung out and just I figured he wouldn't be a whole lot of fun. Quite to the contrary, when I got to know John, he was truly one of the sweetest, kindest, gentlest people I'd ever met, who, no matter who he met, felt immediately comfortable in his presence. He had that great ability that few people have, particularly in the musical community, to make people feel at ease.
What would you say about the Cipollina family? You know, Evelyn, Gino.
Unique. Cipollina family is unique. I mean, a family of incredible musicians. Mario Cipollina, bass player with Huey Lewis. Antonia Cipollina, a terrific concert pianist. Evelyn Cipollina, also an incredible pianist. And with so much talent in that family, the warmth that every one of them has emanated in their lifetimes is just incomparable.
Okay, let's walk along.
Yeah, going on tour with John was almost like being in San Francisco. I mean, no matter where we went, the response to him and the admiration for him and the desire for people to just say hello and shake his hand was the same everywhere, East Coast and West, North and South. John was one of those people in the history of rock and roll that he was an enigma, and yet many people didn't know who John Cipollina was. Many people in the popular music community didn't know who John was, and yet he seemed to have this huge audience, I guess kind of an underground or a cult following that followed him no matter where he went. Not only the women, a lot of men were huge John Cipollina fans. And the love that he had for people just always seemed to come back manyfold.
How would you describe his music, his guitar playing?
None like him. I was watching a show earlier today about Jimi Hendrix, and they were pointing out how unique Jimi was and how he wrote the book on guitar. Well, he wrote a book on guitar. John Cipollina wrote another book with many outstanding chapters on playing rock and roll guitar. Actually, not only rock and roll guitar, but guitar in general, because although John was known for his rock and roll guitar playing, he covered a wide spectrum of musical styles in his playing. And I've said this before, I'll say it again, there's never been a guitar player like John Cipollina who had the quality of tone and sound and style that he commanded. And I doubt seriously that there ever will be another guitar player like our dear friend John. I can't think of the word that could... Miss him is not the right word. It goes well beyond that. John's with me every day. Every time I see one of his bands playing and he's not up there, I hear his notes lingering on. And I'm not a musician, but John has been a tremendous influence on my life. Not so much for the music he played, but for the person that he was. And for the inspiration he's been to myself and so many people that I know in this room.